This topic is very crucial to look into, given the backdrop of the poly crisis and the challenges we are facing right now. Because the students can understand that when they grow up, in their peak of their time, they are going to experience a country which is into a high income category. So that's a vision right now, right here, we are trying to propose and we are trying to work for. But here, challenges are many. Let me begin with the challenges. The challenges before, the prime minister or finance minister, these challenges are not internal challenges. These are external and the global economic headwinds. How we need to maneuver, that's a big challenge. And we call it as polycrisis. So recently, I attended a program in London, ODI. So they talked about this polycrisis concept. That is, we are passing through a time of geopolitical uncertainties, war, climate and energy crisis. We have mounting global inflation, and the global growth is not doing good. So these are the challenges. And on the other side, if you look into the fiscal policy and monetary policy, the debt is mounting. And IMF has recently come forward with a statement that the debt is mounting, but the global growth is not up to mark. When the growth stagnates and the debt mounts, that is not an easy coexistence. So we need to find out solutions to understand that how we can pitch our country to the next level given these global headwinds, given this poly crisis. You have any solution to go ahead, how to navigate through this crisis? It's not like a steady state we are. We are into a crisis mode. So then we have to visualize that by 2047, we are going to be a high income nation. Now, what we need to do is to articulate a macroeconomic framework to reach there, how to envision the growth path. So, here, let me unpack the monetary policy and the fiscal policy for you. Now, we have new RBI governor. Sanjeev Malhotra has joined, and Dr. Malhotra will be talking about the growth inflation, how he can do that is his mandate, how he can adjust his monetary policy stance towards high growth and low inflation. That is his mandate. And neutral policy stance is what the monetary policy is about. Now look at the fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is remaining accommodative in the post-pandemic period. And the articulation for Viksit Bharat by 2047 is to envision growth path given the debt reduction, because we are into a very accommodative fiscal policy stance right now with relatively high deficit and high debt. But if we try to take a gear back and control the fiscal deficit right now, the path which we envision for the Viksit Bharat may suffer. It will have adverse growth consequences. So, what to do with this debt? In the post pandemic period, the revenues are very uncertain. The tax buoyancy that is not up to the mark. So, we need to take debt. And given the path of the debt to GDP as it is mounting, then we need to take a call that what could be the threshold in which it can happen. Now, let me tell you, I'm on a meeting. I'm in a meeting. Thank you so much. I'm sorry about it. He understood that I am in a meeting, but still he persisted. Sorry about it. Okay, so we have high fiscal deficit and high debt path. So we need to maneuver that to reach to the growth, high growth or the high income nation. That's exactly what, I'm trying to focus back. Here the question is, the deficit is the parameter in which we need to function. And the deficit is now 3.5% of GDP for the state governments and 4.5 we need to take it up to by 2025-26. So when that is the case, what to do? If you're curtailing the fiscal deficit to 3%, then it will have growth recovery process consequences. In the sense, we need to go into a mode of fiscal austerity measures. And if we do that expenditure compression right now, then the Viksit Bharat dreams will suffer because the capital expenditure we need to curtail, that we cannot afford to do that at this moment. Now, the narrative of the government is that we are envisaging Viksit Bharat 2047 by linking the high debt and high deficit to the public infrastructure investment in the economy. And in the backdrop, as Dr. Misra rightly pointed out, in the independent India, we have done the same thing. If you can recollect what you have read in different books about discovery of India, it is interesting to recall about the commanding heights of the Indian economy then was infrastructure. We dreamt about the Bakranangal Dam. There are a lot of infrastructure, that was happening in that period when we were into that independence mode. So right now, the same narrative that we are focusing on the capex formation, we are focusing on the physical infrastructure right now. And the articulation is that this infrastructure will help the private investment to crowd in, and it will also help the foreign capital to crowd in. So let's unpack this narrative. So far, so good. We have capital formation in the economy, and we also have transferred a fixed amount from the budget to the state governments because they are also equal partners in Viksit Bharat dream. So we need to take the states with us, and the transfer of 1 trillion rupees down, or 1 trillion, not dollar, rupee, to state governments, that is very important for the state governments to be on board regarding the capex formation. But the state capacity differ. So why there is a deviation between what is envisioned to be done by the government and the actual outcome related to the capital spending, that's a matter of concern, but it depends on the state capacity, and government is working on it. Now, high deficit, high debt, and that is linked to increasing the capex infrastructure, and it is used for decreasing the output uncertainties or output gaps. So that narrative holds very good if the monetary policy stance is not in a hawkish mode. But if you look into the monetary policy realm, you can understand that we have very high interest rates. So when new monetary policy framework was envisioned, then the price stability was the criterion or the concern or the objective of RBI. But then, when they focus on the price stability, when they focus on the inflation containment, they need to maneuver the interest rates in such a manner that they need to control the inflationary elements, and they need to keep up the interest rate little high. But what are the consequences and how it will affect the drain towards economic growth recovery process? Because if the interest rate is high, then the investment will suffer, right? The cheap credit will not be there. Then how the growth recovery process will be supported if we keep the interest rates higher? On one side, fiscal policy is remaining very accommodative with focus on capex infrastructure, but at the same time, monetary policy is only partial in its impact on the growth recovery process because they are not in a position to keep the interest rates lower. So, in the low interest rate regime, accommodative fiscal policy is okay because the debt servicing will not be costlier. But now there is a tug of war between inflation management through interest rates and the public debt management. So, how to solve this? You just imagine. I will give you the challenges. Students can take a moment to understand that, if you are in, now RBI governor, what is the decision you're going to take? Or what are the challenges before the monetary policy or RBI right now when we envision into the path of Viksit Bharat? I'll tell you. On one side, we need to look at the Western world. how they set the interest rates. And if the Western world is in a mood to go hawkish, if we don't set our interest rates high, then the capital will be flighty. This is one challenge. The second challenge is, as I already mentioned, we have high inflation. The global inflation is also mounting. When there is geopolitical uncertainties and risk, there will be supply chain disruptions, there will be supply side shocks. So, how to tackle that? That inflation which is mounting globally, we need to keep the interest rate high. That's a challenge number two. Three, RBI governor will be always interested in a very good interest rate which not get into negative interest rate quadrant. Negative interest rate is, very tough in the sense, whatever we put the money, in pensions or in banks, we won't even get what we have deposited. So if that is the case, if the erosion of value for the money getting into negative interest rate quadrant, that's a tough call. What exactly is that? You set your interest rate lower than the inflation rate. So the real interest rate is a deviation of your nominal interest rate from inflationary expectations. So if the inflationary expectations or inflation is higher than the nominal rate, then you will get into negative real interest rates. That RBI governor cannot afford. So he will keep the interest rate high because inflation is mounting. So on these are the challenges on one side. On the other side, if you keep the interest rates higher, as I already mentioned, the growth recovery process will be slower. In the sense, your credit will not be cheap. Investment process will be delayed. What to do about that. Otherwise, you have to take a call that good inflation containment itself will lead to good growth. Otherwise, suddenly, if you anchor your inflationary expectations, that will get into wage spiral, wage price spiral. You cannot afford to do that. That's another challenge. So I'm giving you three challenges on one side. On the other side, I mentioned about the growth recovery will be slower and public debt management will be costly because we are keeping the fiscal policy very accommodative. But debt servicing will be costlier if that is not a low interest rate regime. So these are the challenges on both sides. Now, the policymaker's job anywhere in the world, that's not easy now. That policy certainty and policy coordination is very crucial to take the country to the next level of graduation rates, to the next level. So it's a challenge. Now, I have spoken quite a bit, giving significance to the physical infrastructure. But, infrastructure is not just physical. When we envision Viksit Bharat 2047, if we don't invest on human capital formation, then there will be good roads, there will be good infrastructure, but the quality of the human capital formation will suffer. So, infrastructure means we need to broaden the concept. It is not just physical, it is social, and as Dr. Misra pointed out in the beginning, it needs to be digital. So let's take a moment to understand social infrastructure. There, education for all, the literacy rates, that's very crucial when we envision Viksit Bharat. So, along with the infrastructure, we need to envision good education, education for all. This is going to be the priority. So, for that, we need to invest in social infrastructure, and that comes under the revenue spending. Now, health for all, that's a concern. And now, if you look into the numbers, when COVID hit, that time also, when you look into the numbers, public expenditure on health to GDP is just hovering around 1%. So, if we increase that health expenditure to GDP, then we will be able to do required R&D in the health sector and required strengthening of health infrastructure in primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. So, how to do that? Now, if you're focusing on health sector and focusing only on insurance, then it is only going to be partial, the impact. I will tell you. If you look into the national health accounts, out of pocket spending, by the Indian population is quite high. That leads these budgets to be catastrophic for the low income households. So the government, they support it by providing insurance. But take a moment to understand this. But insurance, excuse me, will it help the poor people to reduce the catastrophic nature of health spending, or will they put the poor people into further catastrophic nature of spending and into a perpetual debt? We need to ask this question because we need to take a call how we want to envision the health sector expenditure. Excuse me. It's like changing climate here. So cold. I'm okay. So here, if you spend on insurance, that makes the entire system very expensive. And studies have shown that in many cases, even after the support by the government, the people, their expenditure, the nature of expenditure go further catastrophic. If that's the case, on the other hand, if you strengthen the infrastructure at the primary health centers and the accessibility of the people to the health system, that can do wonders. It's not only the story of health insurance. So we need to invest in the health sector, and that is very crucial. Now, how this is linked to the size of the government? Size of the government is measured by expenditure to GDP ratio. So is it the case that good the size of the government, higher the expenditure to GDP, then higher the health spending? We had looked into the cross country numbers. It need not be. There are many countries where the size of the government, that is a total expenditure to GDP, is not as high as India. Health sector expenditure is quite high. So there is no, it's an inconclusive statement that size of government matters to have a good, expenditure to GDP ratio. There is no link. It's a prioritization. It's a prioritization of the government. That political economy is very crucial here to have social infrastructure on board. Now, we have emphasized on social infrastructure, but there is a kind of an episodic expenditure compression over there. In the sense, the social sector entire spending remained constant, but within that, we have, higher the water and sanitation spending, lower the education and health spending. So a kind of an episodic compression happening within the budget of for the social sector or social infrastructure. We need to look into these questions because the quality of human capital formation is very crucial. And then the skilling and employability comes. Now, the major problem is we focused on the fiscal rules, like we need to contain the fiscal deficit. And at the same time, we focused on the capex. Then what happened? Revenue spending compression is happening. That means the personals, the employment opportunities, that's coming down. So if you don't spend on personals, if you don't create enough employment opportunities, then it's going to be a jobless growth. In the sense, the growth will be capital intensive, and that India will not be able to afford. So in the last budget, we have given focus to the inequality and the plummeting of the jobs, the employability of the people. So that lag in the growth of employment to the growth in the income, that lag, that's jobless growth. So we started focusing on it. It's not only the case of India. Globally, the growth, the employment suffered because in the post-pandemic space, we are still recovering from that shock. So employment opportunities, that pandemic that created a lot of negative impact on the job market. So we are still working on it along with the capex. So that's the case. Now take the question of inequality. When we talk about the Viksit Bharat, are we only talking about physical and social infrastructure, or are we also talking about inequality issues, interpersonal inequalities, interregional inequalities, income inequalities? So, all sort of inequalities are there. So, are we talking about that? And the fiscal policy and inequality we need to look into in detail, because the public policy, how it's going to arrest inequalities. And here, two things are very crucial. One is using the public policy tool as a tool of redistributive justice, social justice, and second, not to create crony state business relations. There is a book by Harvard economist Professor Lan Pritchett. The title of the book is Development and Deals, DEALS, Deals. If the government, the state business relation is crony, and if deals are created, then this inequality will widen. So, income inequality is one thing, but deals induced inequality is yet another. So, we need to understand the deals. In many parts of the world, the deals created issues. That state business relations became chronic. So, we need to look into those things, and a very good regulatory framework is very crucial, that the deals will not happen and the state business relations won't crony, especially in the extractive sector. So that's one thing. Second, when we tackle the inequality, should we be tackling it through tax side, or we should be designing expenditure to tackle the inequality issues? So this is a crucial question. And recently in meetings in Rio, in Brazil, in G20 meetings, a proposal was put forward that, okay, development can happen if you tax wealthy people. So we have this, book titled Capital. I think students might have read that. It's written by Piketty. So he popularized a concept of 1%, the top 1% income class. So this top 1% income class, should we be taxing them? And that's a kind of a wealth tax. We can create that, and it will be linked to the poverty eradication, and it will be linked to tackling inequalities. So, this point, this deliberations in G20 came from the perspective of tax justice. So, should we be getting into that? It is not as easy as it's said. There are country specific issues to tackle with these problems. And India tried all these things long back in 1970s when Indira Gandhi was our prime minister. So we need to look into this technical issues on the taxation side to pitch tax as a potential public policy tool for social justice and to reduce inequalities. Now, expenditure. Of course, we should design expenditure in such a manner and use the fiscal space optimally. How to do that? And many economists envisioned about universal basic income, like you will get a constant amount from the government. So I can ask students, will you be happy that the government get into the mode of cash transfers into your hands? Then you will have enough time to get into the job market. And in between job market, government is supporting you with some compensation. So is it okay that cash transfer into the hands of the people can trigger the aggregate demand? And if you look at the growth numbers, it is not only investment led, it also need to be consumption led. Why the consumption is shy? How to trigger the consumption? These are important questions, because if you look into the numbers, it's not coming from the consumption. It's a sustained investment led growth. So investment, capital expenditure, we cannot reduce. But how to trigger this consumption? How to use fiscal space for that? Is universal basic income, that unconditional cash transfer into the hands of the people, that will be good. So students can take a call on that. You can deliberate upon it. So the question is, within the limited fiscal space, if you are the finance minister, will you be designing employer of last resort policies within that limited fiscal space by creating employment opportunities for the people to earn the participation income, and live dignified? Or you support, because employment opportunities are plummeting, job markets are drying up, you need time to get to the job market. So in that time, should government, and also for the poor people, when they have cope up with the livelihood crisis, should the government be supporting them with a universal basic income or a cash transfers? So within this, many heterodox economists pointed out that employer of last resort policy, the government, when everything else fail, the government should act as an employer of last resort and give people opportunities to participate in the economy and earn an income. So how to design that? This question is very important, and it is closely correlated to skilling as well. So this is an important question. Now, I mentioned earlier that it is a capital intensive growth. So when you unpack the taxation side, what kind of policies we need to do? Should we be reducing the personal income taxes so that disposable income in the hands of the people will be relatively higher? And should we be getting into the pillar two of OECD framework related to the corporate taxation? We have now a global minimum tax for the corporate tax, that's 15%, to avoid the tax war, to attract the mobile capital. So, how to tackle this corporate income tax? So, that's about the direct taxes. And relatively, in a country, if the direct taxes are relatively more than the indirect taxes, then it's okay that the overall tax system is not regressive, because indirect taxes is little regressive because poor people pay taxes. When you think about taxes, it's not that we pay tax and you cross subsidize poor people. No, that narrative is entirely wrong, because the taxes are paid by poor people as well. When you buy a commodity, you pay tax, that's indirect tax. In the overall tax structure, if the indirect tax, that's GST, is relatively higher, or when comparable to the direct taxes, then you can't say that we pay tax and you cross subsidize. That narrative is entirely wrong. We all pay taxes in India across income quintiles, that is indirect taxes. The moment you hit the market to buy a commodity, you pay tax. So it's not that only rich people pay taxes. That's just income tax. Okay, now the multiplicity of the taxes, the ease of doing business, and the ugly, good, and bad elements of the GST. We are living with this, and we are trying to rationalize the GST, and we are trying to work with the multiplicity of the taxes, which is creating problems in the ease of doing business. Everything, those reforms are happening within the GST Council. So the tax reforms are very crucial, including the tax administration, because tax administration is tax policy for an emerging country like India. It's not that always increase the taxes and you hit more tax revenue, because law of a curve that operates beyond a point, you will get less revenue in spite of increasing the taxes. So that's about the taxation side. Get into non-tax. Now, in the post pandemic space, we needed to increase the revenue requirements or the fiscal space. So, what to do? The revenues were uncertain on the taxation front. We got into non tax revenue through disinvestment. But the fiscal marksmanship story of disinvestment is not that great. So in future, when we think about the revenue or the fiscal space for growth, we can't do much from the disinvestment proceeds, because disinvestment is not only about the fiscal proceeds, it's a process, and that process will take time to yield you the fiscal proceeds. So, if you look into the fiscal marksmanship, that is the difference between what you project that you will earn this much revenue from disinvestment. And when you look at the actual numbers, there is a huge deviation. Then your marksmanship will suffer. Then, if you're not getting the amount you envisioned in the beginning of the budget cycle, then that much fiscal space is shrunk for your expenditure design. So you can't afford to do that because it affects your expenditure. So then, when you envision the projections, when you do the fiscal forecasting, then we have to do a very modest or a very realistic forecasting related to the revenue we will get. Otherwise, it will affect your plans regarding growth because there will not be any proceeds to support the expenditure design you have. So the revenue stability, that's very crucial for the expenditure design. So that's a story about the revenue side. Tax GDP ratio, it's tough to increase. Given the situation and given our dreams to reach the next level of that graduation dreams, we need to take debt. We can't do with zero debt. So deficit is good only when it is tied to the predictive purpose. If it is for profligacy, then we are getting into a very kind of debt trap. Like in Argentina, they took debt, they grow, then again debt growth. That's not the story which we can afford when we envision the Viksit Bharat by 2047. And now, if you look at the fiscal rules, because it is rules based macroeconomic framework for Viksit Bharat. If you look into the rules, then we have fiscal deficit to GSDP or GDP at 4.5 and GSDP at the state government is 3.5. So that needs to be maintained. Now, in the next budget onwards, we will be getting into a very methodological reduction in the debt. So we have to do that. Otherwise, high debt and low growth, we won't be able to afford. So how to do that will be one of the major deliberations in the upcoming budget and in the next few years. Because now globally, in the post-pandemic times, the fiscal policy became very accommodative with very high debt, and now they have started getting into the debt restructuring mode. But it has to be done without negative impact on the growth recovery process. So it's very tough, in the upcoming years. Now, the problem is there are two elements to the growth process. One is cyclical, the other is structural. So there are many studies which give empirical evidence that in the context of emerging economies like India, it is not that everything is cyclical. In the sense, business cycles, ups and downs, you have studied business cycles. It's not every time that you will get clear business cycles and you can date clear business cycles in the context of emerging country like India. In the sense, the downturn that's happened in the business cycle, that may not be a temporary cyclical element, it may be a permanent scar. Then you think that counter-cyclical fiscal and monetary policy will help you to take that cyclicality and the upturn in near future. That may not happen. So then you have to work with the structural reforms in the economy. And that's very crucial. The structural transformation is very important when we envision the Viksit Bharat. So, how do you maneuver the public policies to tackle the structural bottlenecks or the structural impediments in the economy? That's very crucial because everything is not just cyclical. So, cyclically neutral fiscal policy stance is one thing, getting into structural reforms is yet another. And our fiscal consolidation policies at the subnational governments, that is closely tied to structural reforms. For instance, power sector reforms. Now we have commitments towards the energy, like the climate change. India has put forward national adaptation communication. So we have climate change commitments. So how do you do the structural, reforms incorporating this energy transition, the climate change commitments? When you look into that, monetary policy, fiscal policy, those transition, and the energy transition, these are all closely correlated because you may not get revenue from the fossil fuel based anymore. So that will affect your fiscal space. So energy transition affects fiscal space. So the fiscal transition and energy transition, that's correlated. Now, let me tell you the structural reform story that's happening in the power sector. You know that the story is having a dual story in the sense, in India, we have produced enough, electricity for 100% electrification. But the distribution story is not that great. The discom companies are in problem. So many times, government has, announced many non-SLR bonds to clear up what is happening in the debt that happening in the discoms, in the distribution companies, by giving state government guarantee. But that adversely affected the state finances. And it is a moral hazard as well, because how many times the taxpayers' money can be utilized for, clearing up the problems related to discount companies, then be privatized. But the structural reforms are based on efficiency parameters. And when we move to the that electric, when that transition happens, we need to have sufficient electricity, and we have energy poverty issues. So these are very crucial. Overnight, we won't be able to transform into non-fossil fuel economy. So that takes time. So we have efficiency parameters. Financial efficiency parameters. Students can take a look into the financial efficiency parameters in the power sector, like the AT&C, that is aggregate technical and commercial loss of the distribution companies across states in India. Is it coming down? Or it's still theft is happening, the technical loss is happening. So we have to minimize the aggregate technical and commercial loss in the power sector. Second is, we have to reduce the aggregate cost and the revenue, that gap. The tariff revisions are very crucial. Then smart metering, power sector infrastructure, this is very important. Disaggregating the grid to commercial and domestic purposes. A lot of reforms need to happen in the power sector. So, in the fiscal consolidation process, what India has envisioned is that state governments can have little more fiscal space if they do the power sector reforms correctly. In the sense, deficit can increase up to 3%, but if you want 3%, 3.5%, then you have to correct your power sector. So the point 0.5, the extra borrowing space of a state government, relates to the power sector reforms. So then you take a look into this efficiency parameters. Will the state be able to avail this 0.5 extra borrowing space for their growth procedures? These are important questions. And as I mentioned, when we envision the Viksit Bharat, the public policy framework, the economic framework, it's not top down. States are equal partners towards Viksit Bharat. So there will be capex transfers to the states. There will be reforms at the state level related to land, labor, capital, and investment. There will be total factor productivity. We have to increase. There will be structural reforms related to that, which our finance minister has announced in the last budget. The Gen X reforms she announced, and there was also a paragraph on Viksit Bharat, but it was very vague. And as Dr. Misra pointed out, we are still waiting for that document to be published by the government. It's not at public. We have deliberations in the Lutyens Delhi because we already have TPP, the 20-point program. We already have international commitments in terms of sustainable development goals. So when we talk about the Viksit Bharat 2047, are we talking about, you know, playing it given this TPP and SDG, or is it going to be an entirely new framework? Or how do we converge the existing international commitments related to the SDG goals and the TPP, the 20-point program, which already we have? So these are the questions now. Mostly will come with a new monitoring policy, new monitoring and evaluation framework related to integrating the existing targets of the 20-point program and the SDGs. So these are important practical or implementation issues when we talk about the Viksit Bharat 2047. These are concerns, matters of concern. Now, the states, they have to, take a lot of reforms at the state level. Now, the money is a crucial issue. Intergovernmental fiscal transfers through the Finance Commission, that's a major part of their revenue. And there should be a very good scientific tax formula in which the intergovernmental fiscal transfers, IGFT, needs to transfer to the states. Then the prioritization of the development agenda at the state level is crucial. For instance, the climate change, as I already mentioned, power sector reforms, and articulating the climate adaptation statement at the center and state level. That's very crucial when we think about the Viksit Bharat. Because if you take a meticulous look into the narrative of Viksit Bharat 2047 announced in the last budget, you get three key words. One is economic prosperity, second, environmental resilience and sustainability, and third, of course, good governance. So governance deficit is very important. It is, as bad as your fiscal deficit. So implementation issues and how the institutions, this time the Nobel Prize was given to, the people who, the economists who have worked about institutions. Why nation fail? That book, that shows that institutions matter. So governance deficit we need to tackle. So economic prosperity, then beyond the GDP paradigm by taking it to human development and environmental sustainability and good governance. These are the three elements in which we need to work the Viksit Bharat. So let me stop here and take the questions from the students, and then we can do the deliberations further. Over to the students for questions. The floor is open right now. I'll write down the questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your. Am I audible, madam? Am I audible, madam?
Yes, you are. Go ahead. May I know who is speaking?
Yeah, this is Hassan, madam. Actually, our students are asking some questions. Can I proceed with the questions?
Absolutely. Students can talk to me. They can come closer to the mic and ask me questions.
Fine,
I
ma'am.
can sitting there. Yeah, I can see the hall. Yeah.
Atira. Yeah, you asked there. You could stand and ask. Hello, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Yeah, I
I'm
can see
Karthik.
you. Tell me your name. I will write down your name and question. Yeah.
Why FDI investment in India is decreasing year by year?
May I know who is speaking?
Yeah, you're
Karthik Puja, ma'am. Karthik.
You just
Kar-
yeah, the student.
yeah, FDI is declining. Tell me. Yeah.
Year by year, why FDI is declining in India?
Okay. I'll answer that. Let me collect more questions, Karthik.
Yes.
Good afternoon, ma'am. This is Adira from.
Adira. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
So my question was, you implied that we have to invest more in social infrastructure. So with such a high, debt India is incurring from year to year, how India can balance both hand in hand? That's all.
Sure.
Thank you, ma'am.
You have any solution for that?
Uh, I haven't thought about it. I just wanted to see what you have in mind for that. Some policy India can, implement so that both sectors can go hand in hand.
Yes, yes. Introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Anya Sharma, and my question is: what role FDI can play in Viksit Bharat, and are there any policy that need to modify it?
FDI. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Madam, two more questions. Twins are coming. Yes, come.
Nancy, you come closer to the mic camera.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Vishakha Yasnoji. So my question is, as you mentioned, the social infrastructure. Even though government is spending more on education, like the enrolling more students,
Yes.
also midday meal or free education to enroll more. But if you see, then but are they going to convert as a human resource, like human resource into the human capital? Everyone who is just enrolled in the school, and because I have this question, when if you see, most of the time all students are not on the same page, so we are like considering the enrolling more, but is it converting the human resource into the human capital? That's my question. Yeah, thank you.
That's
Hello,
asked
ma'am.
by Vishakha, right? Vishakha.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hello, ma'am. Chaitanya. How can AI and innovations in financial sector contribute to Viksit Bharat?
Innovations.
Yeah, AI and innovations.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. So, madam, there are also two more questions in the chat box. Dr. Ovina Bouquet asks how to balance productivity and job generation. And Farana, one of our new student, asks which sector will get affected the most when it comes to economic restructuring, and what are the implications with respect to Viksit Bharat?
Can you tell that penultimate question again? Farana's question on which sector affected most, I got. Before that, you asked me a question. What was that?
He asked how to balance productivity and job generation.
How to balance productivity
Job generation.
and
Job generation.
job generation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. I can see most students come ahead and ask me question. Come forward. I hope I can visit your campus later and we can see, there this online. I am unable to,
Yes, yes.
interact with
Yes.
you. Yeah, we will
Students
do
are-
it future. But yeah, ask.
Do you have questions? Do you have any questions? No, madam. Actually, they have completed all their questions. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. So let me answer your friend's question because you are shy. You cannot ask me. Okay, let me take up Karthik's question first. Thank you, Karthik, for asking me about this foreign capital FDI. A few years back, you read that report by Arvind Mayaram. So he worked on this caps on the fiscal, on the FDI, foreign direct investment in different sectors. So that time we were like, wondering how can government increase the FDI caps of many strategic sectors, including aviation, defense, but it worked, properly because the regulatory framework is there on board. But when we think about the foreign capital, there are two components to it. One is the fickle foreign portfolio investment. The other one is, as Karthik pointed out, the stable FDI. The multilateral companies, their material presence will be there in India. So FDI is relatively stable than the foreign portfolio investment or the hot money. Because hot money means what? When the interest rate, as I mentioned in my lecture, when interest rate increase, this hot money, this foreign capital will fly to the countries where the interest rate is higher. So that is the tension when we have a lot of hot money in the forex. But if it is relatively stable FDI, that transition from the portfolio, foreign portfolio investment to foreign direct investment, that transition, relative transition is okay. But here the question is, it's plummeting and we need to work it out because this is closely correlated to the geopolitical uncertainties. It is not specific to India because due to the global economic headwinds, in general, the global growth and the investment is coming down and it's affecting our country. Second is the policies. You know, I talked about fiscal and monetary policies. We also need to look into the external, the trade reforms and the external sector. So their retreat from globalization we cannot afford because now the tendency is towards protectionism. So will we get into a protectionist policies by announcing a very domestic manufacturing policy? It's very closed, inward-looking economy to protect our country, or will we get into the reforms which makes India competitive to be floated or to be placed in the global markets? That narrative is very important. Or like China, America, they're all getting into protectionist wave. So protectionism. So that we need to take a call. So this affects your foreign capital, foreign direct investment decisions. Because many, if the fiscal policy in the budget, if they announce increasing the taxes, the customs duty increases, the tariffs and all, we will get into a protectionist mode. So that is very important to look into. Third, we announced many PLIs, like that is also in a kind of a Atmanirbhar mode. So we need to look into the policy uncertainties, the macroeconomic and geopolitical scenario to understand the foreign direct investment. But I am happy with the transition from the fickle or a hot money which is relatively volatile to a stable FDI. And now unpack the FDI. Do we need FDI in sectors like raw materials, like mining? Then the question will be, they will take out the raw materials and the finished products will be always theirs. So this was what is happening. This financialization process was happening in the independent India. Long back, we prevented that. So the nature of FDI, are they into the mining? Are they into raw materials? Or are they into other productive business? So this kind of collaboration we need to look into. So let me stop there and we will take it up later. Let me tackle. Thank you, Karthik, for that question. And your friend Anu Verma, Anish Verma also asked about the FDI. So we can take a look into the caps in the FDI, and many sectors are now open to the FDI, and we need to look into those things. But to your friend Anu Sharma, also I want to tell that macroeconomic fundamentals need to be strong for attracting FDI. And in India, if you look into the macroeconomic fundamentals, we are okay. Like if you look into the current account deficit, it's not as high as what was happening in Rajan's regime. We have gone up to 4% of GDP, the current account deficit. But the question is like, you have a gap of X minus M, and you conveniently finance that with the foreign capital, with the capital flows. The financing of the gap was through foreign capital. Then, when the interest rate is higher in the Western world, that foreign capital became flighty, and then your X minus M gap and the, in the balance of payment, you have that X minus M gap and the capital account, right? So then both became problematic. So there are many issues in which the question relates to the meticulous handling of the macroeconomic fundamentals. So that's very crucial for attracting the FDI. Now, thank you, Anu Sharma and Karthik. Now, let me get into the next question of social infrastructure. Adira asked me about social infrastructure, and also Vishaka asked me about the social infrastructure. So the questions are little bit related. One is the fiscal space. Adira questioned about the fiscal space, the available fiscal space for social infrastructure. And Vishaka's question is, it's a kind of a tug of war. That one is ready to understand the fiscal space, the other is asking, okay, let Adira give the fiscal space, but my question is about the efficacy. How you're using that fiscal space? What is the effectiveness and the efficacy of the money you spent on education? So these are two important components of the policy decision process. One is the relevance of a scheme in the evaluation. No, these are important components. The relevance of the decision related to the expenditure. The second is the effectiveness, efficiency, and efficacy of the expenditure. Let's unpack that. Take the case of social infrastructure. Where do we get the money? That's a question. And if I can give you some concrete examples in which state found space for that, Telangana, a new state. So what they have done in the debt maturity structure, if you look into, they have elongated the debt maturity pattern. Like Adira, if you want to hit the debt market, you take debt which is long term in nature, you postpone the refinancing risk so that you get a space to pitch your programs like a robust growth path, human capital formation. So you will get a space. So that's a way some states have done. When you look into that, RBI state finances will give you a table that how it is done. And many states there is no rollover risk. They have maneuvered in not the short-term debt, but they got into the long-term debt, got the robust growth space, and they started implementing. Another state, they got into creating certain institutions like corporate boards, like infrastructure boards, so that they take money through that infrastructure board, which is beyond the purview of your fiscal rules. So within the purview of fiscal rules, you keep your expenditure on the revenue budget, and you design your policies related to literacy, human capital formation. That's what exactly has done in Kerala, because Kerala has very high human development indicators. The role of public policy is very crucial to keep the human development indicators high. And then they created an institution, an infrastructure board to borrow money for the infrastructure of the capex. So that's the way they have done. But are these models sustainable or not? That's an empirical question. But states have innovated many types of special vehicles and all, and that created space for investment in human capital formation. At the same time, that led to the hidden debt, that led to the budget transparency issues. So we need to tackle all these things, and the data building process related to this general government debt and the fiscal space that is on, and public sector borrowing requirement data needs to be continuously done to understand this question related to hidden debt. But if you don't do that, what's the alternative? We have to say there's no money. Bond financing we have done. That's a predominant way of financing the deficit in India. We are not printing money and financing deficit. So people, many schools of thought, they ask us, you go and ask money from RBI, monetary policy. You print money. It's not like exactly printing money and deficit. There's a mechanism in which you can finance the deficit through, center bank. But that will do overheating of the economy, that will create inflationary pressures. So India has controlled that financing pattern of deficit. They controlled the monetization deficit. They got into bond financing. Now, another avenue is external financing of debt. But we have seen what has happened in Sri Lanka. We can't afford to do that, the external financing of deficit, because that has many uncertainties. So our external debt financing of deficit is very negligible, and we have controlled monetization of deficit over time. We are into bond financing of deficit, and within the bond financing, many countries have thematic bond financing for social infrastructure. For instance, in Argentina, they have done within the financing pattern of deficit, a thematic bond was arranged for climate concerns. That is climate or a green bond. And Argentina has done a smart move. They have created gender bond, like, for tackling gender inequality issues. A portion of the bond financing will be thematically linked to the investments related to decreasing the gender inequalities. That is a gender bond. These are the new ways in which the financing pattern of deficit and the infrastructure, social infrastructure, and inequalities are addressed. So these are the different ways. So elongation of the debt maturity profile, because I can't say that we can't take debt, because that question, and a balanced budget, that's not the case at all, because balanced budget, everything looks okay, the fiscal arithmetic looks okay, we are fiscally disciplined, but there will not be any schools, there will not be any teachers, there will not be any health. We think that private sector do everything for us, and if that doesn't do, then so fiscal dominance and the fiscal policy and the role of the state, that's very important, and that has got a role to play over there. But we need to ask the question of intergenerational equity and the infrastructure and the social infrastructure in terms of human capital formation that led to intergenerational equity and not inequities, because we are doing right now those investments. Then comes the Ricard inequivalence theorem. Like Professor Mishra mentioned in the backdrop that there are different schools of thought. So today's debt is tomorrow's taxes. So are we creating an intergenerational debt trap? No, because we are growing out of it. Check your real rate of interest of your economy and real growth of the economy, and students can take a look on the numbers. Our R is less than G. The real rate of interest, that is the cost of the debt, that is less than the growth of the economy. That means we are taking debt, we are growing out of it. That's okay. Then debt servicing, then if the interest rate is higher, then we will have problems running into high debt servicing. So if you're growing out of debt, that little bit of debt is okay, rather than taking the decision that we don't have any spending. That will have negative growth consequences. So that's my answer to the social infrastructure, how we can maneuver. Now the question by Vishaka that, okay, we spent. Many states have already spent on social infrastructure, nutrition, but is it really creating human capital? So when you look at the anthropometric data, stunting, underweight, there are many anthropometric data. There, cognition ability and nutrition, that is closely correlated. And we have done studies with UNICEF and NIPFP. We have done studies related to this in child budgeting. It's very important, like early child development and supporting nutrition for the children. That's very important for the cognition, that abilities. So nutrition and education budgets are closely correlated. Now, you are still skeptical that whether this is creating a really good human capital, despite spending so much on nutrition linked education budgets. My answer is, what is a counterfactual? If you say that, okay, the public accountability, the money is not working, the flow of funds, there are issues, and it's not entirely converting to a human capital, so stay away. then that will lead to further problems. So we need to sort out this expenditure tracking exercise need to be done to understand the points highlighted by Vishaka related to whether the outcome linked spending is happening. The money spent is getting translated into actual outcomes. So those implementation issues we need to look into after looking into the fiscal marksmanship issue. Fiscal marksmanship is we promise certain amount for a sector, whether that is translated into actual spending. If there is fiscal forecasting errors over there, then you know what outcome you are talking about, because the money designed itself is not translated into actual spending. So you have to look into the fiscal forecasting errors first, then get into expenditure tracking and correct course correction, and things will work out. But uh, you know, taking education altogether away from the role of the state, citing that that link between the expenditure and outcomes are weakened, that will, have adverse consequences. But we need to work on it, because the merit goods, the role of the state in merit goods, that's very crucial because of the positive externalities. And benefit incidence analysis is an important methodology. And students can take a look into the papers related to the education sector and the Vishaka's question about the distributional impact. Then the fiscal policy and inequality issues we will be able to understand. And if there is elite capture in education spending, then that's another problem. If there is corruption, that's another problem. So there are many problems at the implementation level, but we should not throw the baby with the bathwater, that there is no link between resources and results. So stop the resources in the sector. No, we need to do that course correction, looking into all the questions you have asked. Thank you, Vishaka and Adira. Now let me take the question of Sukanya regarding innovations and AI. Um, AI, never say no to innovation. Whether it is AI, whether it's crypto, because that's going to be a bad decisions. But certain sectors AI will affect. It replaces jobs. But certain sectors, it helps in increasing the productivity. So we need to see that structural transformation happening in the sector and use the AI positively for our sectors. And this is closely correlated to the digital infrastructure as well. If you look into the crypto, we have taken a decision that we will not ban crypto. In the G20, there was a deliberation that we will put forward a regulatory framework so that the fish coins will be avoided and the youngsters can, take the innovations positively. So when you ask me about innovations, for me, AI, financial innovations happening in the finance sector through the crypto and digital currency, CBDC, center bank digital currency. So these are the innovations for me, and innovations are very precious. And for Viksit Bharat, knowledge-based economy, that's very crucial, and that sector needs to be given importance. And that innovations-based, knowledge-based economy can trigger the economic development faster. So I will take it like that, and I will be very positive for the innovations, including crypto, because if you have proper regulatory framework, this functions. Otherwise, we will get into trap. So regulatory mechanism is what is important for the innovations, whether it is AI, whether it's crypto, or whether it's any other innovations. When we talk about, it's a regulatory frameworks rather than banning crypto or banning the innovations. Now, the question asked by Dr. In chat box about which are the sectors that is affecting most, and how do you want to tackle that towards Viksit Bharat, and also how do you balance productivity and the job generation? Thank you so much for these two questions. Agriculture sector. The narrative was that double the income in the hands of farmers was a narrative. But if you look at the gross capital formation in the agriculture sector, that's not up to the mark. So agriculture sector we need to focus, because majority of the Indian population still depend on monsoons for their productivity in spite of all the policy reforms. And we need to tackle that, incorporating or increasing gross capital formation in the agriculture sector. That's very important. So for me, that's a sector which is going to affect most. And agriculture sector will also face problems from climate change. Okay, so that national adaptation communication should have that agriculture sector on board within the adaptation framework. So these are the concerns, and we need to focus on agriculture sector. It is not as easy as providing cash transfers, which is very targeted into the hands of farmers, because that's not solving the problems related to the agriculture sector. And we have climate change concerns as well. So that's the factors for me, which is affecting, and the sector which is going to get affected will be agriculture sector. Then within the manufacturing, now with the narrative of the green transition, that policy certainty is very crucial for the manufacturing sector to take decisions, incorporating the green transition. So otherwise, if you look into the numbers, there will be below capacity utilization for the manufacturing sector. So that green transition related elements need to be incorporated in the manufacturing policies. Otherwise, there will be policy uncertainty, and below capacity utilization will definitely happen. So that's very crucial for the manufacturing sector. And for services, of course, AI related challenges will be there. We need to sort out that. And, that's it. Now, the final question and most tough question by Doctor in the chat box, by the faculty member, I feel, is how to balance the productivity and the job generation. This is going to be a real challenge, a job generation, because the development, that can be capital intensive or labor intensive. So if it is capital intensive, then there is huge profits. But if you look into the wage, the wage is not growing. So that sort of situation we got into, especially in the post-pandemic fiscal or the post-pandemic policy space. Then chief economic advisor recently made a very smart statement that increase the wages, because the plummeting wages or low wages, that is self-destructive in nature. Not focusing on labor is self-destructive in nature. If you focus just on the profits, to generate demand and to do the aggregate demand strengthening, you need that demand coming from the economy, right? So then the wages, the jobs are very important. So I look forward for the government's plan to create the jobs. One is ELR policies, like employer of last resort policies, like providing the job guarantees. That is very crucial. We have done that in India. We have tested that entitlement based job guarantee program, and it worked well. But there are state differentials in its outcome. In the sense, let me take a gender lens, or let me apply a gender lens to this issue. Like the former managing director of IMF, Christine Lagarde, made a smart statement that the smartest and fastest way to increase your GDP is to increase the female labor force participation in the economy. So when we talk about the job generation, we need to focus on the women as well, like the female labor force participation. We are not experiencing a feminization in the labor markets, just because it is not supported, the employment policy that is not supported by the proper care economy infrastructure. Like the girl students, they will study with passion, but once when there is pressure from the care economy to support the care economy, that they will not be able to do and live authentically by contributing to the economy, but they exit supporting the care economy. So the role of the state is, along with the employment policy, also to do the care economy infrastructure support, so that we will increase the labor force participation of women in the economy. That's very crucial. Then credit deployment. That's very crucial in creating employment, because entrepreneurs, men and women want to become entrepreneurs. Then we need to support the credit deployment and the credit policies. Then I already mentioned that the credit is very high. Now there is a tug of war between Ministry of Finance and RBI related to interest rates, because Nirmala Sitharaman, Finance Minister, Honorable Finance Minister, already pointed out that high interest rate is quite stressful for the MSMEs. So we need to see. So if you want to increase the jobs or increase the employability, skilling, ease of doing business, credit deployment, interest rate management, then overall law and order, that's very important. Overall regulatory framework, that's very important. Then we will be able to increase the productivity. I stop here, and thank you so much. And as students, youngsters have a major role to play in Viksit Bharat. I will urge you to look into the questions related to environment, gender inequalities, and all the issues related to the young population, and I wish you all the best for your academics and also for your aspirations and dreams towards the graduation, like the graduation dreams in the sense, graduation to the next level of income, as well as going beyond the GDP by focusing on the human capital formation, the social infrastructure. Because our Vikasit Bharat dream is not just about economic prosperity to increase the GDP. Like from this level of GDP, we will get into the next level of GDP. Of course, in the size of the cake, we have to increase, but at the same time, it has to be a beyond the GDP perception as well, that aspiration as well, incorporating the people mattered policies and environmental resilience policies. And that's it. Thank you so much.